From WBUR Boston and NPR, I'm Tom Ashbrook, and this is On Point. This week, the House GOP gives health care a new face. James Comey in the hot seat. Hillary Clinton speaks. It was a struggle and a straight party-line vote, and House Republicans got their alternative to Obamacare passed.
The ayes are 217, the nays are 213. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
FBI Director James Comey was questioned on Capitol Hill on his role in the presidential election.
It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election, but honestly, it wouldn't change the decision.
And Hillary Clinton said she would have won the election had it not been for a few factors.
I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me but got scared off.
This hour on Point, our weekly news roundtable with Lisa Desjardins of the PBS NewsHour, Yoki Dreesen of Vox, and On Point news analyst Jack Beatty. You can join us on air or online, where this conversation is always on what just happened to American healthcare. What will stick? Join us anytime at onpointradio.org or on Twitter and Facebook at On Point Radio. Joining me now from Washington, Lisa Desjardins, correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Lisa, great to have you with us again. Thanks so much for joining.
Hi, Tom. Great to be here.
Also from Washington, we're joined by Yoki Dreesen, Deputy Managing Editor and Foreign Editor at Vox. Yoki, welcome back to On Point.
Thanks, Tom. Nice to be with you.
And from Hanover, New Hampshire, Jack Beatty joins us. Hello, Jack.
Hello, Tom, Lisa, and Yoki.
It's only passed the House. It's got a lot more to go in the Senate, but here was the president celebrating yesterday in the Rose Garden. Well, here he was.
This is a great plan. I actually think it will get even better. And this is, make no mistake, this is a repeal and a replace of Obamacare. Make no mistake about it. Make no mistake.
Lisa Desjardins, the words he was looking to say, and there he was able to say them, or did say them, in the Rose Garden anyway. This is it. This is the promise of the campaign trail. This is the repeal and replacement of Obamacare. What does he have here, Lisa?
There's so much to say about this, Tom. It's hard to know where to begin. Do we begin with this unprecedented celebratory event when the bill has a long way to go still?
Bust all the Republican lawmakers, congressmen down, women from the Hill, and whoop it up in the Rose Garden.
Right, exactly. Now, the House Republicans did have a very difficult time finding the votes for this. And in the end, yesterday, it passed with 217 votes, exactly one more than Republicans needed. It was a very tight call. And in general, Republicans aren't sure that they want this bill. If you talk to some privately who became late yeses, there are several concerns, I think, that Republicans have had throughout this process and that we will see return when the Senate takes up this bill. But those include, of course, pre-existing conditions. There was a late change to the bill that brought on some votes, but which would allow states to get waivers so that they could allow insurance companies to not have the pre-existing conditions that are in place under Obamacare. Republicans insist that that would not harm people because they would expect the states to then transfer anyone at risk for getting a big insurance hike into a high-risk pool. That's a complicated notion, and it's very heavily debated. Another of the many other concerns is Medicaid. This bill, according to the Congressional Budget Office, would mean 24 million fewer Americans would have health insurance in the next 10 years. One reason why is it has nearly $900 billion in cuts to Medicaid.
On balance, is this really taking care of people, or is it stripping health care from Americans and sort of hiding the move?
What Republicans would say is it's giving Americans more options, that it's allowing them to have plans of many different shapes and sizes. Democrats say, well, what that means is you can have a plan that has almost no coverage to it at all. You could pay $5 or $50 for a plan, but it's not going to give you hospital coverage or maybe drug coverage. And we think that that's just not enough. Republicans say it's up to the individual to decide, and that's the power we want to give them.
On the House floor yesterday, we had House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi talking about the political consequences of having voted for the health care bill, warned GOP lawmakers it would cost them their seats.
You vote for this bill, you have walked the plank from moderate to radical. And you're walking the plank for what? A bill that will not be accepted by the United States Senate. Why are you doing this? Do you believe in what is in this bill? Some of you have said, well, they'll fix it in the Senate. But you have every provision of this bill tattooed on your forehead.
Why are you doing this? Of course, she's out of power. Yoki Dreesen, what's the answer politically here in terms of promises here, in terms of Republican calculations or strong-arming, job-owning from the White House, from Paul Ryan? How do you think they got it over the hump this time? Why?
I think that they were relying on two things. One, just the sheer bullying power of any president. For all of Trump's faults, for the fact that he is profoundly unpopular, that he's not trusted, et cetera, he is the leader of the party, and he is very popular among much of the party base. And remember, things have been so gerrymandered that very few Republicans are actually in competitive districts. So for the vast bulk of Republicans, even the sort of mythic moderate Republicans who don't really exist in any large numbers, this is actually a safe vote. Their base has been saying repeal. They've promised for years to repeal, and now they could say to their base, we've done that. And they're willing to take that risk because the risk to them for the vast bulk of Republicans just isn't there. And if you're being personally bullied by the President of the United States, even if you don't like him, even if you don't trust him, you know he is the leader of your party, at least in name. You know that he is running the government, at least in theory. And it's a hard thing to go against your own president when he is saying, give me this. What's most striking to me is that this bill does almost the opposite of everything that candidate Trump promised to do in his own bill.
Meaning what?
It does not. Meaning this takes away coverage from, if you believe the CBO, which scored, which is a wonky word, but basically analyzed the bill to discover what it would cost and what it would do, they found that healthcare costs would rise and that at least 24 million people would lose coverage. Remember, during the campaign, Donald Trump repeatedly promised
nobody will lose coverage.
Nobody will lose coverage. It'll be cheaper. It'll be better. This is a giant tax cut, ultimately, to the wealthy. It is something that takes away coverage from tens of millions of people. It takes away things that Trump promised would be in there, like pre-existing conditions. All of that is now gone. So whether the Senate puts it back, whether the Senate ultimately doesn't even get this to a vote or pass it, the things Trump promised explicitly, one after the other, are now gone.
Of course, Speaker Ryan touted it very differently in the White House Rose Garden yesterday. Here he was.
It makes health care more affordable. It takes care of our most vulnerable. And it shifts power from Washington back to the states, and most importantly, back to you, the patient.
Jack Beatty, what do you make of that characterization? More affordable, takes care of the most vulnerable, shifts power back to the states and to the patient.
Well, on the most affordable question, the CBO estimated that premiums could rise by as much as 750% for, say, a 64-year-old earning $25,000 in Phoenix, Arizona. You know, this represents the most drastic upward redistribution of wealth in American history. $800 billion in Medicaid going to the poor, to the elderly in nursing homes, sustaining them in life and in health. That is going to be transferred back to corporations and wealthy, $300 billion of it to people earning $200,000 or more a year. On an average, the richest Americans are going to get $250,000 out of this. And not only is it an upward redistribution of wealth, it's a regional redistribution. If you look at where the money is in this country, this means that Sheboygan is emptying out some of its wealth, or the things that go to keep its people in life and health, to the Upper East Side of Manhattan, to Greenwich, Connecticut, to Bel Air, Los Angeles. It is it's from red state America to blue state America, all places Hillary Clinton carried. It is I don't think it's a health care bill at all. It's a tax cut for the rich.
Well, it will have health care consequences one way or another. Let's go to our listeners. Justin in Esterville, Iowa. Justin, thank you for calling. You're on the air.
Hi, Tom.
Hi.
This Obamacare is nothing short of theft. And replacing it with another bill that forces you to buy a product is nothing short of theft. Having the government force you at gunpoint, because that's exactly what it is, to buy a product, is exactly theft. And
you're talking about mandatory coverage that was there. That's not there, as far as I understand, in the new House bill. And come on, man, it was never gunpoint, but you had to pay a fine if you didn't.
It is gunpoint. They say, this is the law, you're going to follow the law, or else you go to jail. That's gunpoint.
Well, no, it was a fine, but
on top of that,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So everybody wants to talk about how this is helping the poor, and if we repeal it, it's going to help the rich. You know what helps the rich? Insurance coverage. because by definition, they're a pro-profit company. They pay out less in coverage than what they take in premiums. So the American citizen would be better off not having health care coverage at all because they'd pay less out in out-of-pocket expenses than what they would in insurance costs. Not to mention that the cost of health care when you pay out-of-pocket is actually less than what the cost is when insurance is paying for it.
Hey, Justin, you're losing me on about 16 points in a second there. I mean, go out sometime, get a serious health condition, and try to pay for it out of pocket. You'll find out in a hurry how much that costs.
Pay for it out of pocket.
Yeah,
but the problem is that overall health care costs have been driven up.
Lisa, I mean, you see right there's so much sentiment, or at least in Justin's case, saying, no, 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 just give me nothing that has that Obamacare flavor to it.
Right. I think, first of all, to get at what this House bill does or doesn't do, it's a bit tricky in that you're right. It does repeal those fines if you do not have health insurance coverage, but it technically leaves that mandate in place. There's just no fine right now, and that has to do with procedural problems that they've had. They also
what does that mean?
I
mean, a mandate without a fine, is that a mandate at all?
It's not one that's penalized, no. But say, for example, that Democrats return into power, they could also return the fine without much difficulty. There is, however, a fine in the House Republican bill if your coverage lapses. And insurers are the ones that get that money. They are able to charge you a significant premium under this bill if your coverage lapses. And that will affect a lot of people who may lose insurance short term. But I want to put in one word for House Republicans. They say what they're concerned about is insurers leaving the market and people not having any option. They say this bill addresses that.
We have seen the number of insurers dwindle. Of course, Democrats say Republicans drove them out. And here we are. It's health care on the line, our very health at the end of the day. Lisa Desjardins, please stand by there with PBS NewsHour. Yoki Dreesen with Fox, Jack Beatty. I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point. We'll be right back. We're looking at a week in the news. Trumpcare wins in the House. James Comey in the hot seat. Hillary Clinton says shoulda, woulda on the election last fall. Flooding on the Mississippi and more. Yoki Dreesen is with us from Fox. Lisa Desjardins from the PBS NewsHour. Jack Beatty's here, and you can join us. What do you want the Senate to do now with the House health care bill? What did you make of James Comey's testimony this week? Mildly nauseous, he said, about his role in the 2016 elections, but said he'd do it again. What did you think of Hillary Clinton saying this week that Comey and the Russians cost her the election? People really thinking about health care and where this goes. Misha in Charlotte, North Carolina. Misha, thank you for calling. You're on the air.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Just want to talk about it, what the Republicans and especially the Freedom Caucus and Trump administration. Trump, it was on his website initially that the insurance will be portable, that you'll be able to tax deduct it. They haven't done it. So the biggest thing of the Freedom Caucus was to make it portable. Now, you've got to understand, and everybody knows about it. Portable, first of all, is incompatible with employer-provided health insurance. Right now, we have this thing which started in 1942 under FDR during the war. It's not portable. Just imagine, if it is portable, there's no issue with pre-existing condition. It's yours. You leave your job, it's yours. There's no issue with pre-existing condition. So the Freedom Caucus wanted to make it portable, and it is gone. It's on the table.
Well, I mean, you can't take – it's true that you can't be guaranteed that you'll take your insurance with you from one employer to another. Lots of potential answers to that, some nowhere in the conversation right now. Universal health care coverage and all the rest. But here we are. Promises made, Yoki. It will be affordable. Pre-existing conditions will be covered. And that seems to be now, both of those, an open question. But there were fig leaves offered here, or some reaction. There's $8 billion out there to go into high-risk pools for the states. That's supposed to be the answer to the pre-existing coverage problem, pre-existing condition problem. Are these real answers? Is the Senate going to take them seriously? Is this going to end up looking totally different on the other side, Yogi?
So to take the questions, if I could, in reverse order, when this passed, you had an immediate response from Republican senators, from a fair number of them, saying that this is dead on arrival, that whatever they do will be completely different. You had some Republican senators say, we're not even watching the vote, we really don't care, and making clear that whatever bill they ultimately craft may look nothing like this bill, which then raises the issue procedurally of, as you know, if there's a House version and a Senate version, They're supposed to go to conference and do a version they can both vote on. If the Senate version is as different as it is likely to be, the House may not ultimately pass that. There are two issues that the Senate is particularly worked up about. One, Lisa referenced this earlier, is this enormous, nearly $1 trillion cut to Medicaid. That is mostly, as Jack referenced, ultimately a tax cut for the wealthy. But you've had the senators from states where that expansion of coverage under Obamacare has been vital. Lisa Murkowski from Alaska being one of them, say if that Medicaid expansion is rolled back, we will not support the bill. The House bill rolls it back. It eliminates about $1 trillion. On the pre-existing conditions, it is a fig leaf because if you say, as this bill now does, individual states can pull out of having to cover pre-existing conditions or having to offer baseline care that might include maternity coverage, emergency room coverage, et cetera. If states can opt out of it, then this collapses. It no longer exists. And the idea of a $8 billion contribution for high risk, which was kind of the last amendment put in, is really fundamentally insulting. The healthcare part of our economy is 1/5 of the U.S. economy. You are talking hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of billions of dollars. So the idea that $8 billion will somehow take the poorest among us, the sickest among us, the portion of our country that most needs help to get health insurance, that $8 billion is somehow going to cover that is really, frankly, kind of insulting.
Jack, is this in the end, healthcare is important. When you need it, you know it. Is this about taking care of Americans' healthcare? Is it about political signaling?
Well, it's about following your campaign promises. I mean, Paul Ryan put it, I think, earnestly and with some passion before the House yesterday. He said, look, a lot of us are here because we promised to repeal and replace this bill. And if we don't do that, we break the thing that got us here.
I mean, I get that, but there were other promises too. Affordable, pre-existing conditions covered.
Yes, but all that I think for Republicans goes beyond. You know, that's by the board for them. The main thing is we promised, and now we're delivering. And the main promise, the primary one, the one that they ran on in 3 elections, was repeal. And then some people would say replace, but mostly it was repeal.
Get it out, and maybe it's headed out. Donald Trump saying that's what's happening here again and again yesterday, repeal and replace from the president's lips. David in Stanton, Virginia. David, you're on the air.
Good. Hi there. Just wanted to make a statement. My family is affected by this change. My wife died of a genetic heart condition 34 years ago, and at the time my children were 5 and 2, and it turns out they are both afflicted with this condition, as well as my 4 grandchildren.
Yes.
The Affordable Care Act was a godsend for me and millions of other people whose families are affected by pre-existing conditions. And to take that away will affect millions of people's lives. And for this callous, cynical bill to be foisted on the American people, it's a crime. And it's a lie by the Republicans, and especially the degenerate, disgusting Donald Trump.
David, you've got personal clarity on it, and I appreciate your call. Lisa, what about the consequences of this? I mean, there will be people who will take a hit on this. There'll be others who will be very happy for repeal and replace and to see that done. The Democrats chanting, na 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 na, hey hey, goodbye, as if that's a foregone conclusion that the Republicans would pay a price at the polls in 2018. What do you see coming politically?
I think Yoki hit on something here, that there are not that many Republicans in swing districts anymore in the House. The Senate may be a different situation, especially when you represent a large rural state. We've talked about the importance of healthcare and the economy. We haven't talked about rural hospitals. In some counties and some states, rural hospitals are not just a economic engine, but the main, sometimes the only economic engine. And there is great concern over how this bill could affect rural hospitals specifically. That's a big political problem, especially for U.S. senators. But it is also a problem in some rural districts. The Collars District is the Virginia's 6th congressional district. That's generally a strong Republican district. Bob Goodlatte represents that area. However, if rural America starts feeling that they've got a health care problem, they could look for someone new. And we know that the voters who chose Donald Trump want new blood in Washington. So these are all factors on the minds of Republicans. As for the vote yesterday, though, most of these potentially vulnerable Republicans voted yes for the bill. Of the 23 Republicans whose districts also voted for Hillary Clinton last year, only 9 of them voted against the bill. So that's 14 of them who felt it was worth it to support this bill.
Let's dive in once more here. Ron in Columbia, South Carolina. Ron, you're on the air.
Thank you, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a nurse, and I'm calling regarding specifically the pre-existing portion of the bill everybody's talking about.
Pre-existing conditions that people may carry, and can they be insured for them? Yeah, insured at all.
Exactly. Here we go. I'm just going to name 2 comorbidity type of things, pre-existing, that people would be, that are avoidable. Let's say type 2 diabetes and hypertension. Now, insurance companies at the end of the day are in business to make money. I mean, they're in business. So let's use our car. When you go to get insurance on your car, they look at your driving record, and your rates are based on that. Okay. And as it pertains to pre-existing conditions, if you go to an insurance company and you already have, let's say 10,000, 15,000, which is not exorbitant with what I see, okay, of medical bills a month.
Yeah.
But you're going to pay them a premium of $2,000. How are they supposed to make money?
Hey, Ron, can we peel this? Ron, I really appreciate what you're saying. Can we peel this back for a second? Are you saying, hey, Americans, watch your lifestyle? Don't come in here with type 2 diabetes?
Listen, people, one thing I see, I'm taking care of people in there. I'm 57.
Yeah.
And I do not have high blood pressure, and I do not have diabetes.
Good for you.
And it's not because I'm such a great guy. It's because since I was small, we had phys ed in school, and I exercise. Okay, I work out. I don't have those 2 comorbidities.
Yeah.
So if I go to, it's a lot of flex pen. A novel flex pen is about $200 to $300 for one, and people go through them sometimes one a week.
Ron, we've got your perspective, and we've got to talk about more than healthcare here. But this is interesting. I mean, Jack picked this up. You know, now this is a very complicated ball of wax, but Ron's a nurse, and he's seeing it on the front line, and he's thinking, he's toting up people coming in here with lifestyle issues, and of course there are many more afflictions that pre-exist than anything you might be able to affect, but some of them you could. And, you know, as a country, we kind of have to get our health together, or maybe we can't afford all the ill health that flows out of that. On the other hand, you know, he's talking about phys ed classes. How many schools have canceled those? How many people live in circumstances where it's hard to live a healthy life?
Yes, well, you know, one defers to Ron's expertise about the medical aspects of this. His view echoes that of Mo Brooks, a Republican congressman from Alabama, interviewed this week, who basically said, look, healthy people through insurance are now carrying people who don't take care of themselves, who don't go to the gym, who don't work out, who don't eat well. And, you know, it doesn't seem to me wrong, he was saying, to have those people pay more for their insurance, which under the Republican plan, you know, suspending, giving a waiver to states on pre-existing conditions, they would pay more, much more for their insurance. And he was basically saying, well, if you're in bad health, it's kind of your fault, pointing to these chronic illnesses. Well, that may be in some...
but then you've got cancer and everything else in there that you cannot avoid.
You could...
Often.
Yeah, what FDR called the vicissitudes of life. Those things aren't predictable, and they're not, you know, moral. They don't stem from someone's will. It's a kind of solipsism to suppose that, you know, my health is dependent upon the way I live. Yes, it would help, but there's no guarantee. But that attitude is out there, and I think it's part of what's in this bill.
Very complex terrain here. Now the Senate picks it all up, and the whole country will be watching. We're looking at a week in the news. Can we turn to James Comey, the FBI director, in testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee this week? He had a lot to say about his role last year, what he talked about, what he didn't talk about in terms of candidates and what they were up to. This was a moment where, before the committee, he said the Bureau can't allow politics to influence decisions. Sort of the notion here that he had to go ahead when he put out statements about investigations into Hillary Clinton and so on. Of course, others were thinking, well, what about Trump and Russia? But here he was. Here was Comey.
One of my junior lawyers said, should you consider that what you're about to do may help elect Donald Trump president? And I said, thank you for raising that. Not for a moment. because down that path lies the death of the FBI as an independent institution in America. I can't consider for a second whose political fortunes will be affected in what way.
Okay, interesting. In the same week, Lisa, that Hillary Clinton is saying Comey and the Russians cost me the election, buy that or don't. But here's the FBI director saying, I can't, I had no choice here. I couldn't be, considering the political implications would have been the political intrusion. Mm-hmm. I couldn't do. It's kind of a bewildering knot of assessment of motivations here.
That hearing was in a very small room. We were all crowded in there. And I have to say, it felt even smaller by the kind of arguments that were happening in front of us. Ultimately, what the FBI director argued, and it took a while sort of to get to this point, was that he said the reason he publicly revealed this new step in the Clinton investigation while not publicly revealing the Trump investigation was that he had already told Congress the Clinton investigation was closed, and that this was a change to what he had said under oath. He felt that he had to then notify Congress because it was a change. All right, that's fine. But I think then when he went further down his argument path and made kind of more stipulations about exactly why the two cases were different, there were a lot more questions. For example, why did he feel he had to come forward when he had no idea what was on Anthony Weiner's computer that reopened this investigation? He said, well, we didn't think we'd have enough time before the election to get at it. Well, so then that indicates the election was a factor in his thinking, after all. And in the end, they did look at all those emails before the election. They did find out there was nothing that at all reflected poorly on Hillary Clinton. It really just seems like he erred on the side of concern over Hillary Clinton being a potential criminal or having potential problems, and that was more of his concern than otherwise.
Yoki, there was a lot of by gosh, by golly in here, and I'd rather be back on the Connecticut shore. But did it in the end come across as credible? The FBI chief saying that there was no political calculation. He just did what he had to do here.
My favorite of his sort of homey, just simple guy references was when he said Lordy, which is, I don't think,
Lordy.
a word you've heard since, the 1950s.
My grandmother loved it.
Exactly. Like Mayberry might have used that with Andy Griffith kind of walking around. But I think Lisa hit it on the head. I mean, if you take Comey at his word, he had basically two concerns. One, if he doesn't say this and it comes out after the election, then he'll be accused of having covered it up and maybe impacted the results in that direction. And two, that everything he was doing was for the greater good of the FBI. He really cast himself fundamentally as this sort of self-righteous, above politics, nonpartisan, purely driven by the facts, straight down the middle kind of person. And there's no FBI director, probably since Hoover, who has done as much damage to the FBI ultimately as Jim Comey. History is going to say whether ultimately it's an unprovable thing, although the election was certainly so close that it does seem likely. But history will say that Jim Comey, knowing about a very serious investigation into Donald Trump, a largely closed, much less serious investigation to Hillary Clinton, went public with the one and did not go public with the other. And that's a hard thing for him to bear, and that's something that will do damage to the FBI. The other thing that jumped out from the testimony was, when we think about, again, history being written, two of the bit players in this, one was Anthony Weiner, rearing his head yet again, but the other was Bill Clinton, because Comey made a point of going out of his way to say that when Bill Clinton met on a tarmac with Loretta Lynch, with the Attorney General, basically he could no longer trust the Attorney General, that he felt as if he had to make his decisions because she was in some way, this is by implication, tainted by that meeting, that she was no longer she could no longer be seen as impartial. At the time, that meeting on the tarmac was seen as a problem. It was seen as a mistake. It now should be seen as a historic mistake because Jim Comey is saying that his decision, which had a huge impact on the election, was driven, at least in part, because Bill Clinton walked over to another private airplane.
Not just any private airplane, on the tarmac there in Arizona, I believe it was. Jack Beatty, stand by. I want to come back and get your view on this. Yoki Dreesen with Vox, Lisa Desjardins at the PBS NewsHour. It's great to have you here. We are looking at a week in the news. This is On Point. We'll be right back.
This podcast and the following message are sponsored by Blue Apron. Blue Apron partners with sustainable farms, fisheries, and ranchers to bring you everything you need to create incredible home-cooked meals. Ingredients come pre-measured, so there's no food waste, and it's delivered right to your door. Rediscover how fun cooking can be while enjoying seasonally inspired recipes and exploring new flavors and cuisines. No commitment. Get the meals only when you want. Get your first 3 Blue Apron meals free plus free shipping by visiting blueapron.com/OP.
I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point. In other news this week, late-night host Jimmy Kimmel said his infant son was born with heart problems and needed immediate surgery. Kimmel said this week pre-existing conditions should not keep anyone from getting medical care, least of all a new baby. It was heartfelt and political.
If your baby is going to die, and it doesn't have to, it shouldn't matter how much money you make. I think that's something that, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or something else, we all agree on that, right? I mean, we do.
Well, maybe Stephen Colbert went after President Trump on The Late Show this week with a string of insults.
You're the bloatus. You're the glutton with the button. You're a regular Gorge Washington. You're the presidents, but you're turning into a real hater. Sir, you attract more skinheads than free Rogaine.
Colbert on a real tear there, got in a little hot water himself. And at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, comedian Hassan Minhaj, emceeing the evening, greeted the press corps.
I would say it is an honor to be here, but that would be an alternative fact. It is not. No one wanted to do this. So, of course, it lands in the hands of an immigrant. It's how it always goes down. No one wanted this gig. No one.
Hassan Minhaj in the House. The president not there for the first time in many, many years. The president of the United States not attending. He was out at his campaign rally in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We've got Lisa Desjardins with us from the PBS NewsHour. Yoki Dreesen is here from Vox. Jack Beatty is with us, and you can join us as well on Comey, Clinton, healthcare, the president on churches and religious institutions and what they can do in terms of politicking. The president kind of talking up a couple of dictators, tough guys this week. The North Korean leader as a smart cookie, he said, an invitation to the Philippines' killer president to the White House. What do you make of that? Does the president need a history lesson on Andrew Jackson and the Civil War? Are you flooding on the Mississippi? And what do you make of the no charges move and the death of the dead guy just selling CDs outside the store there in Baton Rouge, on the shooting of the Dallas teenager this week, of the racial taunts at Boston's Fenway Park this week? People really thinking about Comey and Hillary Clinton this week with her sort of a star turn once again, saying, I would have one. Brian in Boothbay Harbor, Maine. Brian, you're on the air. Thanks for calling.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to make a quick point about Hillary Clinton's scapegoating again for her failure and the DNC's failure. They're not taking responsibility for their decisions. Anyone that's been following the primary can clearly see how they outed Bernie Sanders and their collusion with the media. It's terrible for the party. I'm a Democrat, and it's disheartening, to see this.
So do you believe that the Comey statements had no effect on the election, or that's just not the fundamental issue for you, Brian?
That's not the fundamental issue. Of course they had an effect. Everything has had an effect for better or worse. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the DNC's decision to, just look at what they did with the superdelegates and their count of the delegates before July, and the collusion with the media and all this hype around Trump and Russia. And the Democratic Party is just now resorting to being the lesser of two evils, where we're better than that. We all know that we should be better than that. And if I can make a quick comment on the healthcare issue,
yeah,
I believe that, I'm afraid, terribly afraid, that if this bill passes, if this kind of law, if the repeal of Obamacare passes, this is just going to be another or a terrible, painful, and deadly step that this country may need to take in order to get to a single-payer healthcare, in order to get to a government-run healthcare like the rest of the industrialized world.
How would it end up there, Brian? You're saying things would be so bad that everybody would step back and reconsider at some point?
Well, earlier you made the point that it was a giant tax hike or a tax cut on the.
Tax cut for the wealthy, we heard. Yeah.
If you know the history of the Boston Tea Party, it wasn't because of taxation without representation so much as it was a tax cut for the East India Trading Company that was cutting out all the competition through a tax cut. And it's that kind of massive distribution of wealth and inequality that creates these revolutions.
Brian, we've got it. Jack Beatty, speak first, if you would, to the Democrats and what they've learned or haven't learned in Hillary Clinton's complaint this week. Is she justified in making this complaint? Is she right that she might have been president now? You've got Brian there from a kind of Bernie perspective on this, saying that's not where the problem was, folks.
Well, as to the Democrats, there was a really desolating poll out a couple of weeks ago that had some bad news for the Republicans, but in a way, worse news for the Democrats. It said that more Americans think they are out of touch with average Americans than the Republicans. So that's partly to do with the kind of campaign Hillary Clinton ran. It just didn't seem relevant or in touch with the needs of many Americans. As to this question about the election, Nate Silver, the brilliant analyst, has a big paper out yesterday, a couple of days ago, analyzing this, and he basically comes down to saying that the Comey letter was decisive. He does his regression analyses and he flourishes his algebra, and what he comes down to is that that this is quantifiable, its effect. That is, you can see what the polls were before and what they were after. You can't quantify Hillary's bad campaign. You can't quantify Russia. You can quantify this, and at a maximum, he thinks it had an effect of 3 to 4 points, which, especially in Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, that could have shifted the election, and at a minimum, an effect toward Trump of 1 point nationally, which in an election is decided by 77,000 votes in 3 states, that would have been enough. So Nate Silver says it was there are all kinds of background problems. Hillary was already in the danger zone, but this tipped it.
Hardly infallible, Mr. Silver, but there's an analysis that says it would have made the difference. Tom in Milwaukee. Tom, you're on the air. Thank you for calling.
Hi, Tom. Regarding Hillary Clinton, when I heard her make a statement, she'll throw out a rhetorical question like, did we make mistakes? And then she'll say, of course we made mistakes. But then she never goes on to specify what those mistakes were. She'll double down on Comey and Russia and every other thing. And personally speaking, I think this whole election was a referendum on not only Hillary Clinton, but Bill Clinton. I think America is just tired of the Clintons, period.
Well, we're on new terrain now, that's for sure. Hillary Clinton talking to us from the rearview mirror. Tom, I appreciate your call. Let's bring it right up to date. We had interesting comments this week from President Trump on a couple of strongman leaders, to say the least, talking about the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, being a smart cookie, pretty savvy, and extending an invitation to the Philippines, literally the killer president of the Philippines, who's bragged about extrajudicial killings, I think, in his own hand there, and encouraged others to do the same, getting some love from the president of the United States this week. Here he was on CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday, talking about Kim Jong-un of North Korea.
A lot of people don't like when I say it, but he was a young man of 26 or 27 when he took over from his father, when his father died. He's dealing with obviously very tough people, in particular the generals and others. And at a very young age, he was able to assume power. A lot of people, I'm sure, tried to take that power away, whether it was his uncle or anybody else. And he was able to do it. So obviously, he's a pretty smart cookie.
And the President of the United States would be honored to speak with him. Here was Arizona Republican Senator John McCain on Morning Joe Tuesday.
I don't understand it, and I don't think that the president appreciates the fact that when he says things like that, it helps the credibility and the prestige of this really outrageous strongman. You know, the largest gulag left on earth is in North Korea, and we all know about their human rights abuses.
Yoki, what do you make of the president's comments this week on foreign leaders who would not, by any means, make the screen on human rights or just decent governance terms of, I can't imagine any former president.
Yeah, I mean, the comments about Kim Jong-un in particular, try to imagine just as a thought experiment if Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or any other Democrat would say, not only praise how this man has kept power, which is mass executions, including of his own family, just recently sending assassins to poison someone in an airport in a different country. to rub his face with VX, which was, just as a reminder of how vicious and the fact that his country has chemical weapons. But just imagine a Democrat saying any of this and the kind of outcry you would hear from the conservative media. I think we've seen from Donald Trump going all the way back to the campaign that he likes strongmen. He sort of sees people like Vladimir Putin. He sees people like President Sisi of Egypt. He sees Rodrigo Duterte, as you've mentioned, from the Philippines, who has bragged not just about the fact that 8,000 drug dealers, in some cases innocents, have died since he took office as part of this wave of extrajudicial killings, but has bragged about himself having killed people, 3 people that he says he has shot. So when you say the killer president, you're right in both parts of the phrase. But we know that Donald Trump likes strong men. We know that Donald Trump sees himself as a strong man. And I think part of what you're seeing is the more frustrated he gets, and he's saying this very openly about the fact that the filibuster exists, the fact that judges are blocking him, the fact that the media is blocking him, the more that he feels like our system constrains him, the more he looks at people who have broken their own systems and says, man, I kind of wish I could do the same thing. On North Korea, if you wanted to be as generous as you possibly could, if you really wanted to just fall over, bend over backwards to be generous, you would say Donald Trump recognizes Kim Jong-un is a very sensitive leader, sensitive to slights, that he's desperate, Kim Jong-un, to be taken seriously, that multilateral talks have failed and maybe the time is for direct talks, and that he is setting the stage by trying to butter up Kim Jong-un. That would be the most generous possible reading. But otherwise, you're at a place where if a Democrat had said this about Duterte, about President Sisi of Egypt, who has killed 800 people in a single day, banned political parties, arrested 10,000s, President Erdogan of Turkey, who has recently taken on powers that would potentially allow him to be a dictator of that country, Putin, on, you would say that this is a man whose love for strongmen is really very troubling.
Jack Beatty, the president crazy like a fox here, or is this the new realpolitik? What's going on with these statements?
Well, I see there's an analysis from Jacob Heilbrunn, a very eminent foreign policy analyst, basically saying, "Hey, let's talk to the North Korean dictator. I mean, if you have to butter him up to do that, fine. But I don't think this was a matter of calculation. I think this was the kind of thing that Charles Krauthammer comments on in today's column about this and about the Civil War, some of the unbuttoned comments about Andrew Jackson and the Civil War. He calls these comments gratuitous idiocies, just sort of talking to fill the time. And the president does this again and again and again. One classic one over the weekend asked in that CBS interview, do you still stand behind your charge that President Obama wiretapped you? He said, I stand behind nothing.
The president of the United States, I stand behind nothing. All right. Well, there he is talking in one conversation, but still, that's not a phrase you expect to hear escape the lips of the president of the United States. We're looking at a week in the news. Peter in the Virgin Islands, St. Thomas. Thanks for calling, Peter. You're on the air.
Hi, Tom and panel. I got to say, what Tillerson and Trump are saying about human rights being important but not part of the America First kind of application to international relations is really part and parcel of what deeply worries me about his ideology. And they say he doesn't have an ideology, but I would say America First is at least a doctrine. I not only value human rights for their own sake as part of a liberal democracy, but I also value them as a core component of America's strength and exceptionalism. And our respect for human rights, fosters goodwill worldwide, draws people to our country, sets a blueprint for how other countries can move about and out of oppressive situations, and all of those things strengthen America. So, in other words, that's my interpretation of America First. And people call it the moral high ground, and Trump is giving up that high ground, and by doing so, he's stripping us of a quality that everybody in the world aspires to.
Peter, we've got it from the lovely Virgin Islands. A very clear perspective there. I'm not sure it's the one that President Trump was channeling that night of the Correspondents' Dinner when he was not there, but instead in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. On that night, it was, among many other things, really going after the media, but talking about the wall, saying, we'll build it. And here was the audience, then Trump.
We'll build the wall, folks. Don't even worry about it. Go to sleep. Go home, go to sleep. Rest assured. That's the final thing. We need it. We need it. And if the Democrats knew what the hell they were doing, they'd approve it so easy because we want to stop crime in our country. Obviously, they don't mind illegals coming in.
The president, pretty tough, pretty angry in his language in Harrisburg there. Lisa, what about on the wall? Yeah. Does that come back this fall? Does that go up in the year and years ahead?
The White House has signaled that they do want this to be part of the next spending bill, which is supposed to be passed by October 1st. But there is no appetite so far from Republicans in Congress, including border state and border district Republicans. None of them have endorsed this idea yet. There may even be some questions from ICE as well about whether a wall is good for security because you can't see through it. I think going back really quickly to Peter's comments about human rights and the president and his comments, I had a long conversation with a good Trump source, someone who doesn't drink the Kool-Aid and who I trust more than others, and said, look, the president is a disruptor. And that is how he approaches everything. And that he is going to be both hot and cold, as he was last week. We talked a lot about the comments on Kim Jong-un that were positive. He also called him threatening and dangerous. Yep. So he was trying to have both things at one time. He's a disruptor there, which is important to recognize. But I think you're right that he shoots from the hip a lot. And we also see, not casting judgment on whether it's good or bad, that's the debate. He also is sort of an immediate flatterer, almost people perhaps whose name he only knows. He's very likely to say, and we saw this through the campaign, he's great. This guy is wonderful. I love this guy. And he sort of shoots from the hip, and that's almost his first approach with anyone who he's just meeting or just interacting with, who he thinks is kind of stature.
But don't count on that lasting. We've seen that turn around in a hurry. I guess we'll watch and see what this means for American standing in terms of values in the world. We'll see what it means in terms of American negotiation in the world. Trump's saying we've got to be tougher. Lisa Desjardins, the PBS NewsHour. Great to have you with us this week. Thanks so much for looking at the news with us, Lisa.
Great show. You're welcome.
Yoki Dreesen, Deputy Managing Editor, Foreign Editor at Vox. Yoki, wonderful to have you along.
Thanks, Tom.
And Jack Beatty, great to have you as always. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Listeners, you can continue this conversation. You get the On Point podcast at our website, onpointradio.org. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at On Point Radio. I'm on Twitter at Tom Ashbrook, NPR. Thanks for joining us. This is On Point.